Alex really spelled out a lot of the information that I was also going to talk to, but no, that's fine. It allows me to go into a little more depth into some of the areas that she's already covered very well. And she lived through that experience in a certain place. I worked for a trade union in Miami, Florida, and retired to the wonderful warm climate of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And sort of did retirement in reverse. But I was down there at the time NAFTA was being debated in Congress, and was involved in the effort to stop NAFTA from passing down there. And I remember well the debates that occurred around it. And I think we're just at the beginning of what we're going to hear around the TPP. Right now, the news coverage sounds good. We're hearing that Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, powerful people, the majority of Democratic Party representatives are in the right place on fast track. But if you look very closely at what some of those in leadership have said, they're leaving themselves just enough wiggle room to wiggle right into passage of fast track in the future, unless we do keep the pressure on, like Alex suggested. Nancy Pelosi, for instance, said she is against fast track as it's embodied in the Baucus bill. That is the current version. And she would not support it unless it's changed in some way. So she's obviously leaving open that little bit for negotiation. A number of our delegation members from Massachusetts have told us that they haven't been able to see this secret deal. It's fascinating. They had 600 and some corporate lobbyists and lawyers involved in writing the thing. They could see it, they could amend it, they could come in with proposals for it, and our own members of Congress could only see it under very restrictive guidelines if they were on the right committees. They could go in without any staff, view it without taking notes, and were just isolated from it. So they're honest when they're telling us they haven't seen it. And some of them go on to say, and they're not sure how what their position would be if they were voting on it, but they know they're against fast track. This fast track takes power away from Congress, puts it in the executive too much. So we have to be on their case. We have to not let up our guard. We have to constantly remind them of their current position and why it's a good position, even if we do it in the form of thank yous with addenda as to why it's so good that they have the position they do. When NAFTA was going through, I was a very close friend of the first African American congresswoman from Florida since Reconstruction. We worked together on a lot of issues in our local area that were important to the entire South Florida area, but to her community in particular, and the unions and the movements that we were involved in. And she was firmly against NAFTA. She was one of those that we had over in the not to worry about column. But when it came time for that final vote, you had a Democratic Party president in office who had staked the success of his presidency and his economic well-being of our society on this. All kinds of pressure built up, and promises started coming, backroom meetings, highways could be built. The Metro Rail they were trying to do down in Miami could get federal funds. All kinds of stuff started coming into this discussion. And she, at the last minute, along with enough Democrats, that the thing could pass by 1 or 2 votes, depending on how you look at it. And she went the wrong way. It really was a shock to to those of us down there who thought we knew what was going on, and she just didn't see it as that big a deal. And thought what she was getting was worth more in the horse trading that went on. So I don't think we can take anybody for granted. I think we really have to keep the force and the focus on. And what, as Alex mentioned, we have a real bonus that we didn't have back when NAFTA was beginning. Because while we'll hear the same arguments, we've got 20 years of experience with this approach to free trade agreements because of their success in getting NAFTA through. NAFTA has been devastating for the US working people and for the people of Mexico, by and large. But you'll still hear experts on the NPR and the TV saying what a bonus, what a prize NAFTA has been, how it's increased the general prosperity of society, it's lowered the prices in the stores, it's made it easier for people to live, and it's created jobs, they'll argue. So how that, we all know that you can do a lot of things with numbers when you start playing with them. Some of the things that you should know is that the actual government agencies that were established to track the relative job gains or job losses from NAFTA stopped tracking the job gains after about 2 or 3 years because the numbers were so pitifully low. But they had to, because they have actual money that's available to plants for retraining workers and so forth, if you can demonstrate that the loss of the job was based upon the trade agreement. And they have acknowledged that 820-some thousand workers are entitled to that benefit because of direct loss. And that way it was hard to prove. You really had to jump through hoops to prove that this loss was a result of this trade agreement. Because remember, it wasn't a static environment. Those who advocate for NAFTA will frequently point to the fact that American total number of jobs have increased by quite a few 100,000 jobs every year since NAFTA was put into place, since '93. But that's, during the same time that the internet companies began to grow, that all these transitions in our economy were occurring here and around the world, and they're basically attributing all of that to NAFTA and not looking at what actually was affected directly by it. So if any careful examination will reach a number much more like the one that Alex reported, which is between 700,000 and 1 million is what the Economic Policy Institute looks to when they say how many jobs we lost as a result of that trade agreement. This was a different kind of trade agreement. What it does really is it shifts power within each society in the direction of the corporate interest and the wealthy. And they do benefit in both countries. The wealthy in Mexico and the wealthy in the United States have both benefited from NAFTA. The wealthiest segments of the two societies. But the vast majority of people have suffered enormously. And in Mexico, all these jobs that were created were only a tiny fraction of the livelihoods that were lost when American subsidized industrial produced corn, agribusiness, came in to compete with the peasant campesino farmer who had a small little farm and sold to their neighboring town and sustained life like their parents and grandparents had for generations. That way, had a stake in their society that way. When that was so undercut by really, the American farm subsidy was still alive and well when that was going on, and it goes to agribusiness, and it was a real hook that helped drive down the prices and drive people from the land. It was said in the debate, and I remember it well, that instead of having Mexican workers come to the United States, we would create jobs in Mexico for workers. But immigration from Mexico doubled and tripled immediately after, when people had no livelihood. A few of them could find jobs in the maquiladoras that were set up that's what they call the plants that moved from the United States, not only to trade, not only plants engaged in Mexican-American trade, but plants that might be selling to Europe or Asia, but was looking for a lower labor place and a safe investment environment, which NAFTA guaranteed. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership has been called NAFTA on steroids because it not only includes these broader areas, it includes the Canada and Mexico, which are part of NAFTA, but it goes much, much broader. But it also includes whole new areas. Of the 29 articles, I think, that we believe are part of it, I've heard it called 29 or 26, only something like 6 of them deal with tariffs and the normal business of trade agreements. So the other areas deal with things like copyright law and the right investment, sanctioning, privileging investors in each country so that they cannot be over-regulated or otherwise that their expectations of profit, as Alex mentioned, based upon their analysis of the market can't be changed or altered by local, state, or federal changes in policy in any of the countries. So it sort of puts them in a very privileged position and creates a whole new system of courts that they can go to, which NAFTA did as well, but this is even more so. It would be part of the TPP itself. What NAFTA did is allow people to go to existing international bodies over the local court system. This creates this whole new private system with businessmen they can go to and overrule the regulations or get reimbursed for what they conceive of as their loss. The other thing that happened with NAFTA, and I see that I'm getting near my time, I don't want to steal thunder from other people that will speak on other areas of it, is it really, besides the job loss, there was a real, as Alex mentioned, degradation in what it means to have a job in America. Because I was able to retire to this wonderful climate because of a defined benefit pension that I got from the union I worked for, but they're very few and far between now that people have defined benefit pensions. I'm working with Mass Senior Action now, and most seniors in Massachusetts are scraping by and living on Social Security as one of the main things. But the resources that go to government to maintain all of their benefits and their things are cut down when you cut the wage level from a job that's the equivalent of $15 or $20 an hour to one that's the equivalent of $7 an hour without benefits. And the small store on the corner that used to be supported by people who worked in the plant and had disposable income because they were paid a decent wage that the union had fought for and won, that small business owner also suffers. So business suffers in the fate of it. The whole economy is pushed down. And you can see that in the streets of Detroit or Buffalo or Rochester. The American Midwest, which had been the center of our manufacturing, has been devastated by this, and many parts of our eastern cities have been devastated too. It's just we have the other newer economy rising around it at the same time. So I think that the $1 million figure may be an underestimate, because just like in Mexico, I think there were probably a lot of small business people who didn't have a job, quote unquote, that they lost because the plant was moved, but who maybe lost their business, in part because the people who supported their business no longer had their jobs, and in part also because of the big importations into the big box that was opening down the street to compete with them. But we've seen that real shift begin in this country, and at the same time, the growing economy has been monopolized by a few people at the top. So that since NAFTA passed, the wage level of the American working people has only risen by about 1% or 2% since '93. But the people at the top of our economic heap have seen their wealth grow enormously, about 50-some%, 60-some%. There's been a huge growth in inequity in our economy that chokes the normal growth in domestic commerce and trade. So I think that that's another cost that we may face even worse if it gets into that. And the power shift involved in these agreements also underscores and makes that worse. There are a lot of other things this treaty threatens to do. I want to end on something of a positive note, because when I was down there too, we also had a big movement against the free trade agreement of the Americans. And when that discussion started, everybody said, because we've been through the experience of NAFTA, oh, there's no way to stop such things. You know, the president's behind it. Again, it was President Clinton. The economy had turned around. His creds were pretty good in a lot of communities. But by building a broad movement that included all the trade unions, that included the communities that had been affected, that included, and by getting the word out and slowing it down long enough to get the word out, and people beginning to see just the beginnings of what was happening with NAFTA, we were able to block that, to stop the fast track from passing in 1998, which was only 5 years after they had got it through, you know, in '93. So it can be done. This is the beginning of trying to do it. So I really appreciate everybody coming out, and we just got to put our shoulders to the grindstone, or whatever they say, and try to do it again. Thank you.